Today on Barely Homesteading, I want to talk about our new wood stove and heating our home through the winter. So we got our wood stove installed, but a wood stove isn't very useful without wood, firewood, in order to heat the home. So now that we've got our wood stove installed, we need to cut up some firewood to heat us through the winter. And so we're going to be cleaning up some down trees that we've got here, cutting them to length and getting them stacked for this winter. So some of the logs that we just cut up were rotten in the middle, and so we split those and pulled out all of the punky half-rotted wood to spread out in the garden area to help rehabilitate that soil. So as this continues to break down, that'll go into the soil and hopefully get it from just the dust that it is now into something a little bit more useful and a little bit more nutritious for the garden plants. So we have been living with our wood stove for about 6 months now, and we we grossly underestimated the amount of firewood that we needed to heat the home. So we have a much larger home than we did in Colorado, and we were told that the winter here would not be as bad as we probably had in Colorado, but this winter's been pretty bad. We've had quite a bit of temperatures where it did not get above freezing for days, even longer than a week at a time. We've gotten quite a bit of snow. We were almost at 7 feet of snow this season. So not as much as in Colorado, but still quite a bit. And we grossly underestimated the amount of firewood that we needed. So with that first cutting of firewood, we had about a cord to about a cord and a half of wood, and we decided to use that and see how it got us through the winter. Well, it didn't get us very far. This winter was substantially colder than what we were anticipating, and the locals said that it's been a colder winter than they usually get. So with that first cord and a half of wood, we burned through that pretty quick, and we've actually gone through probably about 10 cords of wood this year. Now, we've got a bigger home, and like I said, it's been cold. We've had multiple days, in fact, week at a time, where it has not gotten above freezing. And this is an older home, the insulation isn't as good, and so we've just gone through a lot more firewood than we were expecting. So we have been spending a large portion of our weekends this winter finding standing dead on our property and cutting that up for firewood, which is one of the reasons why we have not been able to post as much, because we've been spending so much time working on firewood this winter. So I did want to talk to you a little bit more about this winter and how the winter has changed some of the ways that we're thinking about the homestead. So here we have one of the snow piles here on the property. We've got multiples of these. And one of the things that we've learned this winter is that winter in Washington, at least here in eastern Washington, is very different than winter in Colorado. So in Colorado, we would get a storm that would drop 18, 24 inches of snow, and we would get, 13 feet of snow in a season. Well, after those storms would come through, the next week to 2 weeks would be nice and sunny, clear skies. And as long as you got your roads plowed, within a couple of days, they'd be completely dry because the sun would come out and melt everything. Well, winter here in eastern Washington is very different. The sun hardly ever comes out. This is one of the rare days when the sun is actually out. We haven't seen the sun hardly at all. So when it snows, 5, maybe 6 inches, it never leaves. And so we have massive snow piles all over the property because it just never melts. And it's very different than what we experienced in Colorado. Now, we've only gotten, as I said, about 7 feet of snow this year, but that 7 feet of snow is still here. It hasn't gone hardly anywhere. And so we've had to change some of our plans for the homestead and account for the fact that we may have winters like this where we get a substantial amount of snow that just doesn't go anywhere until spring. So for example, in this area, we had planned on putting in a woodshed, but because of where we need to put snow, we've had to change the location of where we're going to put in that woodshed because we've got to have a place to pile snow here. And likewise in other places, because of where the snow is going to have to get piled up so that we can, get in and out of the homestead, we've had to make some changes to our plans. So for those of you that are thinking about getting a new homestead, especially in an area that you're not familiar with, make sure that you have lived through, an entire year, or at least had a good talk with the locals about how things work, so that you can understand what you need to do to deal with things like this. If you're not familiar with the area, you could be very surprised when the weather is not quite what you're expecting, and you find out that that infrastructure that you just put in is completely unusable now part of the year. And you obviously don't want that to happen. Now, another difference between our new homestead in Washington and our one in Colorado is that the trees here in many parts of the homestead are very thick. And so when we do have a rare day of sun, the sun just doesn't get down to melt the snow because the trees are so thick in places. And so we've had to start taking out a lot of trees, which is good because we're going to need the firewood. But another thing to think about as you're moving into a new homestead is, how is the weather and the environment and everything going to affect your ability to work the homestead. So as you've seen in the earlier videos, we have a very steep hill going down to the lower portion of the homestead. And we have very dense trees on either side of that hill. And as the sun would come out, it would not melt that snow very quickly, and it would melt just enough to get a water layer on top and then freeze again, and then the next day another water layer on top and freeze again. So we have a very thick layer of ice at the bottom of that hill that is not going to melt anytime soon. And it's very slick to the point where it's a little dangerous on some days where we get that water layer on top. It is just super slick. So we are going to be thinning out the trees on either side of that hill quite a bit this summer, or this spring and summer, and try to open that up so we get more sun on the hill to keep that ice melted, and not just melted enough that it freezes again, but so that it actually goes somewhere. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on that hill to try to fix that, because as I said, there were some days where it was dangerous going up and down that hill. The other thing is that we're going to need significantly more firewood in preparation for next winter. I don't know if next winter is going to be as cold or as snowy as it was this year, but we definitely want to be prepared. So we're going to need to have, before next winter, probably 12 to 15 cords of wood cut and stacked and seasoned, ready to go, which means that we need to have probably 30 cords of wood cut and stacked, one half which is dry and ready to go for this next winter, and then another 15 cords that are green that can now dry and season all of this year and next year and be ready for the following year. So we've got a significant firewood project or activity that's going to be happening this year just to get prepped and ready to go for the upcoming years. So this winter has been quite the learning experience for us, not only with the wood stove, but with the whole homestead as a whole. While we've been very happy with the wood stove and it has heated the home quite well, we have learned that we're going to need a lot more firewood, and we're going to have to put in quite a bit of time this spring, summer, fall to get ready for the next winter. Since we are starting basically from scratch, I doubt we're going to have much firewood left over at the end of this winter. We've also learned a lot about the entire infrastructure and some of the things that we're going to need to do to be better prepared for the upcoming winter, so that we can utilize some of our outbuildings that we're going to be putting in, and our road to get it to keep from icing over quite as much. So this year is going to be a very busy year. Got a lot of projects that we're going to have to do, and a lot to get ready for next winter. So hopefully you will join us. And with that, this is Lumberjack from Barely Homesteading saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.